Okay. Feel free to write me any question. I'll be glad to answer it. Now, it's basically on chapter 6, we will be talking about the theory and the method for the sampling itself. And the learning objective will be explaining the role of sampling in the research process. We will be talking about distinguish between probability and non-probability sampling. We will be also try to understand the factor to consider when you're determining a sample size when you do a research for it, and understand the steps into developing a sampling plan. So a sampling plan is basically is a small number of element from a larger defined target group element. We always do sampling, knowing or not knowing, we do sampling actually. Once you go and you start cooking something and you start testing the food, whether you should add more salt in it or you should, add more water in it. This is one of the type of sampling. Once you go and drive a car for the test, this is another sampling, is to see how the feeling when you drive the car. So we always do sampling because we cannot really manage everything of it. Now, we assume that, according to that, we assume that the information that we have gathered is basically from the small group help us to make an accurate judgment about the larger group. In other words, because we cannot do a larger group, we go and do a small group, and according to that, we make an accurate judgment and decisions. The process of the sampling is used when it is impossible, as I said, or unreasonable to conduct a census. A census means that we can do, we test, we examine everybody in the, let's assume that we wanted to decide in a city how we, whether they're gonna buy certain product or not. And then if we can ask everybody in the city, then this is called a census. But because it's a city is big or uncontrollable, we take a sample of it and we ask them the same question and hoping that a little bit we get closer to the reality of the situation. So census, a research study that include about every member of the defined target population. So you see like a Canada census, US census, India census, is when the people goes and start adding, collecting information about everyone in the country. That's what you call census. If you do sample of it, a limited group of it, that was called a sampling. Sampling plays an important role in designing questionnaires. So if we are sampling, usually the size of the sampling, the location, the type of the sampling that we're going to take, it usually help define the questionnaire that we're going to put for these sampling. The sampling decision influenced by type of survey that how we gonna ask. If we are asking over the phone, it's a different than we're asking in a personal, and then it's a different than if we're asking you to using a telephone machine, or we sending an email to a certain group to answer. So that the type of the decision, sampling decision is influenced by the type of survey design, survey instrument, So these are the two things that it will be affecting the sampling. The basic of sampling theory, it means the population identified group of elements. It is about identifiable group of elements interest in a research. It means when we looking at the whole population, we want to do a research within the whole population, but sometimes we wanted to do the research with the middle class community or white community or black community. Black community would be in this case is the population. The white community would be in this case, if we are doing this research for them, it will be the population that we are doing a research for them. It's related to the information problem. So it's usually we wanted to find out what things we can sell to them or what problem we can solve for them, what's issues that concern them. It's also defined the target population. So the complete set of elements identified for the investigation. So we wanted to investigate the situation, whether these people are using the samples that is defined for them. Now, sampling unit, the target population elements available for selecting during the sampling procedures. So there is a certain people that is targeting these people. Now, the sample frame is a list of all eligible samples units. In other words, it is, uh, it is a list of all, population that we are looking at. So we are targeting them in this situation. Now, there is a theory, it's called the central limited theorem. Is a very important objective that you need to understand it. And it's about the sampling distribution that drive from a sample random. Random sample will be approximately normal distributed. So our theory, we're trying to see that whether with our decision or our understanding, when we do a research, is how close to reality, to real situation. And will be done through the sample that we are taking, and this sample, how much do you really represent the whole population that we're gonna target. And help us to understand the concept of the sampling error and statistical significance and the sample size. In other words, let's say if you are trying to make a decision regarding a certain situation, whether you want to promote certain product in a country or not. Then you do a sampling. And when you do the sampling, you're trying to find out whether you selected the exact population. Now, let's assume you are in a situation, you're in a mall, and you're trying to sell, $1 unit products. And by luck, people that you are asking, without asking their income, their background, everything, you end up asking everybody as a millionaire. And then there's a question you're saying that if I put this product into Dollarama, for example, would you buy it? Well, the whole thing, if it's by luck that you ask all the people that you're sampling from them, they are millionaire or billionaire, they never been in Dollarama, for example. So they would say, no, we wouldn't. So the answer would be a negative. Um, and that's, you will come up with a conclusion saying, okay, if I'm putting this product in Dollarama, nobody's gonna buy it. So the situation is you are not really targeting the right representative of the population, and the error is extremely high. On the other side, for example, say if you are trying to promote a high-end, very expensive product, and you're standing in the mall and you're asking everybody's that uh, are low income people, and you're asking them, well, would you buy this? They will probably tell you no, because they don't have an income to buy this thing. And you think, no, it's not, there is no demand for it. So that this method is very important to understand the CLT, how sampling error works in this matter too. Now, assessing the sampling qualities is very challenges. Usually, is if you want to get a perfect answer, you can make a census, and we said census is that you ask everyone in the population, and that's very difficult to do, very expensive, and very time consuming. Um, so what do? You do a sampling error. You do usually determine that only after a sample is drawn, a data is collection is completed. And you say, okay, there is a chance of error that I run 5% to very rich people, and I run 5% of the people that were very poor people, and this is the 10% is the sampling error in this. So you say 10% up and down on this result. So when you're assessing a sample quality, you do a sampling error. Any bias attributable to the mistake in either drawing a sample or determine the sample size. As I said, it's that when we say that um, there is a sampling error, we saying that when we are doing the surveys, we commit to there's might be 5% or 10% from the sample that took is not the right people that we are targeting. This is what stands for a sampling error. Now, there is a non-sampling error, which is a bias that occurs in the research study, regardless of whether um, a sample or a census is used. For example, um, when you're standing beside, for example, Dollarama, and anybody who comes out, you're asking him, would you buy a Mercedes? He probably would say no, because most of the people who comes out from usually shopping at Dollarama could be very poor, very limited income. So this is a non-sampling error. But if you are in the regular mall and you're asking everybody whether they're coming out from Dollarama or they're coming from high-end stores, and you say, there is a chance of 5% of people that's coming in from Dollarama, I will be asking them, and there is a chance of 5% of billionaires who they don't shop in the mall, I will be asking. This is a sampling error. But if you are doing something wrong, whether you're doing census or you're doing a sample, and this sample is done wrong, that's called non-sampling errors. So there is two different of the error that might happen. Now, the sampling design is the probability sampling. There is two type of sampling. There is called something probability sampling and then non-probability sampling. The probability sampling says each sampling unit in the defined target population has a known probability of being selected for the sample. So when we are talking about saying it is 5% that I will be, if I have 100 people that I'm gonna ask them, and I just pull anybody without any bias, without anything, each one of them, they have 1% chance of being asked a question. Or being pulled out for a sampling. This is the non-probability sampling. The probability of selection of each sampling unit is not known, and this is mostly that's what we do a survey. We do a non-probability sampling, and the chance of somebody who is being selected probably differs from other person. And this is mostly done in a case of person surveys. So you're in the mall, you see people passing by, and for some reason, you start avoiding certain type of people, not to ask them, for example, young male. You don't want to ask a young male. And that's what is called the probability that a young male will be asked in the mall is not clear. So there is, if there is 100 people standing in front of you, and somehow, some reason, you chose not to select anybody who is a young male, then there is not a 1% chance of probability out of each one of them will get. Some of them will get a higher chance of probability, some of them is lower. So that's called non-probability sampling, and we don't have a chance of saying, what's the chance of this person being selected, and what's the chance of that person is getting selected. So this is the difference between probability of sampling and probability, non-probability sampling. So it means that selection is based on the judgment of the researcher. So your judgment of as a researcher, you say, okay, I don't think a white male will be willing to answer my question. White. So any white male passing by in the mall, you would not ask him the question, and that becomes based on your judgment. And so the probability becomes non-probability sampling. And basically, it may or may not be a representative of the target population. So that's the effect eventually will happen to it. Now, it's just to compare them, a type of probability and non-probability sampling method is probability sampling is simple random sampling. So anybody will have the same chance of being selected. It's a systematic random sampling. So you go every 10th person I'm going to select, every 10th person I'm going to select, could be like that, or every 5th person. It's a stratified random sampling. So you're kind of putting the group, just like the video said, and you group them. You say all the white male, every 5th person I'm going to ask them, all the black male, every 5th person I'm going to ask, all the female, every 5th person I'm going to ask. So that's a stratified random sampling, or a cluster, and you say, okay, everybody who's sitting in the food court, I will be asking every 5th person in the food court. That's a clustering. Non-probability of sampling is a convenience sampling. So as we said, you just, for example, if you are producing something and you take the first 20 product and see, just look at them and says and see the chance of defect in the what's the out of these 20 units you picked, how many of them were defected. So if you're not, it's a convenient, it's just whatever is easy for you to do that. And it is judgment sampling. As I said, you're judging that every white male would not answer your questions. Is a quota, as we say, I'm just going to ask 100 people or for 1 hour. And it's a snowball sampling. So one person, you will be ending asking the same type of people, 2 people, 3 people, same type. So they get a snowball sampling type. So this is where is the difference between the probability sampling and non-probability sampling. Probability sampling design, it's simple, random sampling. Every sampling unit has a known and equal chance of being selected. As we said in the beginning, if there is 100 people, and there is a 1% chance for every person to be selected. This is it's a random, simple random sampling, and they have an equal chance of being selected. Now, systematic random sampling define the target population in order and select systematically. So you say, okay, I will divide these groups. Each group will be according to their ethnic background, and I will ask every fifth person these questions. So this is what you call a systematic random sampling. So it's a forms, customer list, tax payers, and member rosters. So you go, okay, let me download my customer list, and I will be asking every 10th person these questions. Or let me check if I can, my employees. I have 100 employee, and I will ask every fifth employee these questions. And then you divide them like a management employees group. So a stratified random sampling is when you separate the target population into groups or a strata and select a sample from each group. So you divide them, each group, and then you select samples and you start to ask them these questions. So sometimes you have a product and you wanted to promote it, for example, in Canada, and you want to see it's not targeted for only Asian people. It's probably not only targeted for the Indian people, it's not only targeted for white people. So what do? You ethnically separate them, and then you do a survey, each ethnically separated, and you find out which ethnic group is willing to buy more of this product, and accordingly probably you can drive it saying, okay, if I find out that more white ethnic people is buying things, so I will be opening my store or promoting my product within the cities where mostly is white ethnic group. So the proportionally stratified sampling, each stratum is dependent on the size relative to the population. And this proportionally stratified, so it means that the size of each storm is independent of its relative size of population. So if you say that I will ask a 5% of each when I'm separating each ethnic group, I will ask 5% of them. So if I'm separating and I found out there is 100 white ethnic, and I have 1,000 Indian ethnics, and I have 10,000 Arab ethnic, I'll take a 5% of the white, 5% of the Indian, and 5% of the Arab. But if you say no, that's what you call a proportionally. This proportional is the size of the standard depend on its relative in the size. So this is what when you say, okay, I'm just going to pick 10 people from each group. It's a different when you say I'm taking a 10% of each group. Multi-source sampling is when we use a single source cannot generate a large or low incident samples. And that's when you say, for example, when it cannot regenerate enough samples, so you do a multi-sourcing samples, and you say, okay, I will do this group according to ethnic background, and the same group I will do it according to their age background. I will do the same group, female and male. That's a multi-sourcing of sampling. And cluster sampling is a sampling which is divided into mutual exclusive and collective sampling. So as I said, when you are in a mall and you go, okay, I'm just gonna sample a group who is in the food court. That's the area sampling or a cluster sampling. Or you say, in this part of the mall, whomever comes in from a door number 3, I will ask them the question. That's also a cluster sampling. That's including the probability and non-probabilities error in it. So non-probability sampling method is a convenience sampling. As we said, is that you're not looking at what's the chance of somebody is being selected. You're just selecting anybody, and based on your convenient. So it could be convenient based on the, whomever is passing by. There is a production and you pick up 100 products, first 20 of them, and see how many defected in it. This is based on the convenient, and there is no probability there. And judgment sampling, as we said, as a participant are selected based on the experience of individual opinion. And we said that you might think, okay, I don't think a white male will be answering my survey. So you're putting your judgment there, and you're avoiding every white male is passing by. And so this is a non-probability sampling. The quota sampling, participants are selected according to a pre-specified quota regarding the demographic, attitude, behavior, or some other criteria. So you say, I will select 51st white female here, and I will select 51st black female, 51st white male. So this is a quota according to the ethnics or the demographic background of them. And a set of the chosen respondents that helped a researcher identify additional people to be included in the studies. As I was said, that the snowball effect or the snowball sampling is when you asking one white person, white person brings his friends, which is two white persons, three white persons, and this is this snowball, and you end up, asking the same ethnic background people the questions, and you forgot that you need to probably cover everybody's. So that's one of the snowball samples. It's also called a referral sampling. So for basically the factor that to consider into selecting a sample design is first, as we said, is the research objective. Do the research objective calls for the use of qualitative or quantitative research design? And I put that question also in a way saying, what do you prefer in the Padlet? Saying which would you prefer, a qualitative or quantitative research? So the research objective will be putting whether we're going to do a quantitative or qualitative, the degree of the accuracies. Does the research call for making a prediction or inference about the defined target population or the preliminary insight? Okay. Um, um, the resource are it is whether you have a budget or time restriction or both of them, and whether you have enough people who do this survey. So there is a resource restrictions, and we said the time frame, how quickly does this research project have to be completed? And also we need to know the knowledge of the target population. Are there a complete list of defined target population elements? Are we looking for a certain population that we are looking for it, or we are just not define the population? So we are, if we know we want to open, for example, an Indian restaurant, we who is we are targeting, and what kind of questions we can ask them, and how easy is to generate the required sampling frame prospective respondent. So, for example, if you were asked to do, a survey of certain questions, certain requirement, and you were asked to ask only people who is millionaires, how many people in the mall willing to expose their financial situation to you? I'm telling you how easy, how much they are making, or what's their financial situation right now. So these are the knowledge sometimes is difficult to collect in this information. And the scope of research, is the research going to be international, national, or a local research? So whether you are, it's a different when you are opening a chain restaurants across Canada or across USA or across the world or only in a city. The research usually, it, there is a scope in it, how you will do the type of the sampling that you're gonna do. And the statistical analysis need, to what extent, as we said, are accurate the statistical project? Are we putting the sampling errors in it? Or we are testing the hypothesis, whether it's a true hypothesis or null hypothesis? Are we really, this hypothesis is answering the theory that we are building about it? So these are the analysis. Sometimes we are putting a wrong hypothesis and we're trying to design the questions according to that, where the wrong hypothesis, and probably will be approving our hypothesis, and we drive a wrong theory from it. So the statistical analysis also need to put two things in mind. Are we doing the right statistical analysis and right calculation? And also, are we doing the right hypothesis that involved in this research? Um, uh, there were some activities in the Padlet, so I will be saving it and sharing it with you. It's important that you take a look at it and see everybody how they think about certain subject, and it helps you also to write your test and write your assignments, because this is where everybody is sharing their thoughts. So hopefully by today or tomorrow, I'll be saving the Padlet as a PDF and share it with you beside this notes. So the probability sample size, the factor that determine the sample size with the probability design, I think before we start this part of it, there is a few things that I need to share it with you in a small video. It is important that you pay a good attention to it, so you can understand the difference between the mean and different type of, how shall I say, statistical analysis. So I will we'll stop up to here, and we will watch the video, and then we probably can take a short break. This video talks about mode, median, mean, and range. Before we get involved into discussing these type of, I wanted to see you see these short video.
In this video, we will be looking at the mode, median, mean, range, and standard deviation. In the last video, you saw how we can display a dataset using things like histograms, stem plots, and pie charts. We use these diagrams to help us visually display a dataset. However, there is another way we can describe a distribution, and that way is by using numbers. The mode, median, mean, range, and standard deviation give us numerical information about the distribution of a dataset. Specifically, the mode, median, and mean are measures of center or central tendency, and the range and standard deviation are measures of spread. We will look at how we can determine the measures of center first. So suppose I took a random sample of 9 people and measured their heights. Now the mode of a dataset refers to the data value that is most frequently observed. Notice how the number 154 appears 3 times in this dataset. This means that the mode of this dataset is equal to 154. Now the median refers to the data value that is positioned in the middle of an ordered dataset. Students often forget that to find the median, your data must be first put into order. We usually order the dataset from smallest to largest. We can clearly see that the number 154 is in the middle of the dataset because there are 4 data points above it and there are 4 data points below it. So the median of this dataset is equal to 154. When a dataset is extremely large, it might be helpful for us to use the formula n plus 1 divided by 2. This formula tells us the position of the median. N refers to the total number of data values in our sample. We have a total of 9 values in our sample, so n is equal to 9, and 9 plus 1 is equal to 10, and 10 divided by 2 gives us 5. As a result, the median is equal to the value in the 5th position, which is equal to 154. Note that we could have counted from the bottom and we would still get the same answer as long as the dataset is ordered. We always use the formula n plus 1 divided by 2 to find the position of the median. When we have an odd amount of data values, the median will always be apparent. However, if n is an even number, we see that we have 2 middle data points, and if we use the formula, we end up with 5.5. We see that there isn't a value in this position, so what we do is we take the arithmetic average of the two values beside this position. So we would have 154 plus 155 divided by 2, and we get an answer of 154.5. This value is in fact the value of the median for this dataset. The last measure of central tendency we will talk about is the mean. The mean is just another name for the arithmetic average. The formula of the mean is as follows. It is equal to the summation of all data values divided by the total number of data values. If our mean comes from a sample, we call it x bar. So to get the mean for this sample, we add up all the data values, and since there is a total of 10 values, we will divide by 10. As a result, we get a mean or x bar of 165.6. Let's quickly compare between the median and the mean. Both of these are measures of center, but they measure center in a different way. The median refers to the physical middle point, so for this dataset, the median would be equal to 12. Now the mean can be thought of as the balance point. If you calculate the mean for this dataset, you would get a value of 10. If these people were of equal weights, this is the position in which a seesaw would be balanced. Now let's talk about the measures of spread. This includes the range and standard deviation. Both of these values measure spread in a different way. The range is simply the maximum minus the minimum, so it tells us how much room a distribution takes. In this dataset, the range is equal to the largest number, which is 196, minus the smallest number, which is 139. As a result, the range is equal to 57. Now the standard deviation is computed using this formula. The formula looks a little complicated, but the calculation for the standard deviation is simple. We will calculate the standard deviation for the following dataset. I will create a table to help me with my calculations, and this table corresponds to the numerator of the formula. Notice how x bar is contained within the formula, so we should calculate this first. You should find that the mean is equal to 15.4. The formula says we need to subtract each value from x bar, so we do this on the table. 10 minus 15.4 is negative 5.4. 12 minus 15.4 is negative 3.4. 16 minus 15.4 is 0.6, and so on. The next step is to square what we have just calculated. Negative 5.4 squared is 29.16. Negative 3.4 squared is 11.56, and so on. The next step is to find the sum of what we have just calculated. You should find that this is equal to 75.2. Remember that we used this table to calculate the numerator of the formula, so we can now replace it with 75.2. From here, the formula should be pretty straightforward. N refers to the total number of data values, and there are 5 data values in this dataset, so n is equal to 5. We can simplify this, and we end up with a standard deviation that is equal to 4.336. Now what does the standard deviation even tell us? The standard deviation tells us how close the values in a dataset are to the mean. For example, a small standard deviation indicates a small amount of variability for a given dataset. In other words, there will be a lot of values that are closer to the mean, which makes the distribution less spread out. In contrast, a high standard deviation indicates a high amount of variability for a given dataset. In other words, there will be a lot more values that are farther from the mean, which makes the distribution more spread out. The last thing we will talk about is variance. Variance is closely related to the standard deviation. The only difference between these two formulas is that the standard deviation involves taking the square root of the calculations, and for the variance, we don't take the square root. Also, notice how for the standard deviation, we denote it as S, and for the variance, we denote it as S squared. Both of these can be referred to as the sample variance and the sample standard deviation.
Okay. So before we take the break, um, I just wanted to tell you that next class there will be a test up to the chapter of this chapter we will be covering, and it would be a 12 question. You have to answer 10 of them. Now, I'm just gonna give you a break for, and we will be back at um, 2. We'll be back at 10 minutes after 2. We cannot, do a census, basically. So we do have to do a sampling error. For example, if we are doing a production, we're not going to look at each unit that we are producing and see where is the deficiencies in the, whether there is a deficiencies or not. So we will pick, for example, 10 units and we will test them. Now, as we said in the earlier, we said there is a probability, non-probability, but sampling is the way of doing a surveys because it's impossible to do a census. Now, just back to the subject, and we said that in the in the previous class that the sampling, the factor that consider when you're selecting a sampling is designed by the research objective, by the degree of accuracy, the resources that you have, the time frame, the knowledge of target population, and the scope of research. And we have no option but to do a sampling. We cannot do a census. Now, when we are doing a sampling, there would be a chance of error. So we need to determine what's the chance of error. The higher it is, the chance of error, the less accurate our research. And the less accurate our research, the less driven information that we can make a decision from it. So we need to be, when we do samples, we need to be very accurate. Now we said also there is 2 types of errors. One error is coming from not selecting, according to the chance of, say, if he has a chance of selecting 1%, so everyone has to have a chance to select of 1%. And that's a sampling error, but there is a non-sampling error when we are biased and start selecting to meet according to our understanding or to our previous history of work, or we are trying to drive certain information, so we become very biased toward the sampling, and we will select people or select the people that we expecting them to answer us in a certain way. So these are the sampling that we're looking at, and the factor that determine the size and the probability design. Now, let's see how far we got there. Okay, so we said that the probability size, sample size, is a factor that determines the sample size with the probability of design and population variance. We in the video we saw the variance is the chance of how spread is the population that we are targeting. The level of confidence desired an estimate. So we are looking to have a 5% sample of errors or 10%. Usually 5 to 10% is the maximum. So you say, well, a 5 or 10% chance of we ask the wrong question, ask a wrong person, or 5 to 10%, the probability of this person getting selected is off. The degree of the precision desired in estimating the population characteristics, and precision means acceptable amount of error in the sample of error, sample estimated. So when we do a sample and we do a survey, sometimes we say, okay, we want to have an error of 5% or maximum of 10%. So when we are asking a question, we might be, we're asking if it's 5%, and we're asking 100 people, it could be 5% of it, of this 100 people are not meeting the target. So that would be an error of the 5% of precisions. The sampling methods that we are using usually is non-probability sample size and other sample methods, and it's basically for non-probability samples, the sample size formulas cannot be used. So we just do a regular survey. We go outside in a market, in a mall, and ask people. So there is no samples formula there says there's a chance of 5%. We don't know exactly what's the chance of an error it's happening there. And we will be determining the sample size is a subjective and based on our judgment. So we're looking around and we say, okay, these people looks a middle income, and we will be asking them. We're not sure if they are middle income or high income or low income. Is based on our judgment. And the other thing is other sample size determination is a method that are less formal. And basing on sample size on a similar previous studies. So you probably want to do a sampling is like your previous study. And determining the sample size based on size of the base of the number of questions asked. Okay. Now the question comes in here, steps in developing the sampling plan. So we already know a type of sampling, and we said that usually the question, the answers, the problem is derived of what kind of a samples, and that will determine the sample plan and this what kind of questions is going to be there. So in this stage, what we'll be doing, we will be doing a blueprint for or a framework needed to ensure that um, the data is collected are representative of the defined target population. So if we are searching to have probably to see the white ethnics, how many of them they do eat an Indian food, we want to make sure that we are asking the white ethnics people. So to ensure that the data is collected is representative of defined target population. And from there, we develop the sampling plan. And in the sampling plan, we define exactly the target population. So there where we say, okay, we are targeting in this area the white ethnic people, and we select the data collection method. So we say, okay, how are we gonna collect the data? Are we gonna have a face-to-face interviews, or are we gonna call them, or are we gonna put a form? We do that in the restaurants. Sometimes restaurants comes in and leave you a form that you have to fill up, or they can ask you these questions to collect the information. So it is, or they ask you to, answer these questionnaires in order to next time you come in and get a discount for the food or even the clothes. Then you're identifying the sampling frame needed. So what kind of a sampling you're going to do, probability, non-probability, the error size, all these things in it. And this select the appropriate sampling method. Are you going to do face-to-face or telephone method? Now, then you need to determine the necessary sample size and overall contact rates. So if you are taken in an area which is they have like a 500,000 people lives in, and you just interview 5 people, that's not the right sampling size. Is that you need, because you need then to make sure that you indicate the sampling errors, and you indicate where you're asking these 5 people, and the more would be more background check and more interviews in this case. And you need to create an operating plan for selecting sample. So as we said, there is different type of selecting samples. It could be a clustered, it could be stratified. There is a plan, for an operating plan for the selecting this unit. So the convenience, so there should be an operating plan for it. And execute the operational plan. So when you're as a team and you're trying to come up with the last assignment, you need to sit together and determine all these stages and how you're going to develop your final statistical plan, regard of selecting a product that can be sold or exported or imported. Before you import something or you export something or you start doing a business of something, you need to do such a marketing plan. And a marketing plan comes in with a basic that you need to look at the sample size and do a sampling and find out the result. Because if you're not doing that, then you're building your plan according to non-clear information. These are also can be you can find them in online, such information. Now, when you do developing a sampling plan for a menu, and this is an example, if we're talking about, we are trying to develop a sampling plan for a food a menu, whether this food menu is, we can use it or not. this is the process. You need to look at it. And first of all, you need to see how many questions should the survey contain to adequately address all possible new menu item, including the notion of assessing the desirability of a new cuisine. So sometimes these questions you ask, it could be a very incomplete question that does not give you the full picture whether these people are looking to have a new menu, and in the new menu are they looking to have what kind of food is there. So asking a question, did you like the food or not, is not the enough question. So if they said, did you like the food or not, if they say yes or no, let's say they said yes, says, is the menu was enough foods options there, they could say yes or no. And if it's no, then you would need to ask, would you have more vegetables, more options of meat, more option of. So this is how you try to complete your survey. You need to address all these menu, because you don't want to repeat the second part of the question and third part. It's all they have to be addressed, these questions. How can it determine that all necessary item will be included in the survey without the risk of ignoring menu items that may be desirable to a potential customer? So they might like certain things in your menu and they don't like certain things in your so you cannot really ignore the whole menu and start a new menu. So you needed to know what kind of food you can keep cooking and providing to the customers, and what kind of other food that you can add on to the menu, which is that would be more likable to others also. Now, the next step is, how should the potential respondent be selected for the survey? So now I have all the questionnaires ready, and if somebody answers these, if somebody tells me guarantee these answers for these questions, then I know exactly what I'm supposed to do the next step, whether I should build a new menu and what's in it in the new menus. So the questionnaires is ready, but I'm not sure whether the answers that I'm getting is will be developing my own judgment on these questions. So now I need the next stage is, how should the potential respondent be selected for the survey? Am I gonna should the customer be interviewed while they are dining, or I should the customer be asked to participate in a survey open exiting the restaurant, or should a mail or telephone approach to be used collecting their customer and or non-customers? So here, how I would select the people that I'm gonna ask them a question. While they're eating, I should give them the survey, they can answer it, or when before they leave, I can give them the questionnaires, or I should tell them that, can you give me your phone number, or leave their phone number or mail, as we see so many times when we go to a store or a shop, clothes or something, we get their email, and sometimes they send us the survey to us to answer. So here is what we are really looking for, is the fact that we need to, when we are building a survey, we wanted to make sure that the questionnaires are ready, and these questionnaires should be answering exactly what's our next step. And then we need to know how we're gonna ask them. And once we get the answers, we need to do our calculation, whether we have done the right calculation for that. Is there any question? Okay, I'm gonna go very quickly on this. I know it's a little bit heavy chapter to grasp, so please review it, and I will share the notes with you, and and these notes will be, you know, part of the questions also in the coming test. Now, very quickly, once we are to be value of sample in the marketing research, it is a sampling because we cannot do the whole census. We cannot select all the population and ask them the questions. We do a sample. We take a part of these people and ask them questions. And we're hoping these people that we are getting information from them, they are representing the whole population. And we do that, we always do that when we drive a small car or we test the food and we need to add more salt on it. These are all ways of sampling. Now, sampling is a part of the research process. When we do a marketing, we do a sampling because we're going to drive the result from this sampling to answer our questions that we already have in mind, such as building a menu, such as opening a new store, or exporting certain product or importing certain product. And is used when it's impossible, because we cannot ask everybody to answer all these questions. So if we are exporting something, for example, into India, we're not going to ask over 1 billion people to what do they feel about this product. So we are trying to pick up some population out of this, hoping these represent the whole India. Or if we are trying to export product to the middle class people in India, we hope we take some group. Let's say middle class is around 500 million or 300 million. We're not going to ask the 300 million. We hope that we take some samples, few people of these, and these people are representing the whole 300 million of middle class. Sampling plays important role in designing questionnaires, because when we want to we ask questions, they do how we're going to sample is a very important. Are we going to sample at the convenient, or we divide the groups, or we going to make face-to-faces questionnaires? This is all determine the questions that we are going to ask. If we have a chance of only asking 10 people, or we don't have enough resources, is it better we do a face-to-face sampling. Sampling influence the decisions and type of survey design. And the basic of the sampling theory is whether a population identify group of element of interest to research them. So we go, or the population is not the whole people. In the sampling is the group that we are selecting. So this is our population. Let's say 100 people out of the 1,000 people. 100 people is our population that we have selected to do a sampling. And relate to the information problem. Now we need to define the target population. Are we element identify for investigation? Are we going to interview 10 people, 100 people, or 1,000 out of the whole group? So we have the whole population, all the people, and then we select the population, and from that population, we probably sometimes select a group out of it. And the sampling unit target population element available for during the sampling process. Now, the theory that is driving is called CLT, or central limit theorem. And sampling distribution derived from a simple random sample will be approximately normally distributed. So if there is 100 people, each one of them should have a 1% chance of being selected. And this is a perfect sampling. And if we know that there is not a chance of 1% out of these 100 people to be selected, then we put a sampling error of 5 to 10%, which is, it says that we've made an error of between 5 to 10% of selecting these people, a chance of errors. And the sample size is very important. So we're not gonna, if we wanna, the bigger is the size, the better is to close to the realities, but there is a control of time and budget of the size that we wanna make. And assisting sample quality is, there is so many challenges in it. So we cannot do a census. We cannot go the whole people and start, you know, doing this for them. So we pick the sample, as we said, and assessing the sample quality, we said there is a sampling error and there is non-sampling error. The sampling error is when we take something, we are drawing based on some bias and saying that we're just going to select the white male and ask them the question, or that's what you call a sampling error. Non-sampling error is when we build the questions or we're doing the whole sampling is wrong. We're asking the wrong questions, for example. And sample probability sampling, each sample unit in the defined target population has known probability. So we need to say what's the probability of this person getting selected. Very important. And non-probability is that we cannot really see what's the chance of this person getting selected. We just go and pick people randomly, and we don't know whether this is the chance he's going to be selected 1% or 5%. And it's all is basically based on our judgment. And we spoke about probability sampling, and we said simple random sampling, systematic random sampling, stratified sampling, and we said that we divide the whole population that we selected into groups, and according to some, for example, ethnics, height, sex, or any other things. And then we ask them questions, or a cluster. We say this group, we're gonna ask them as a cluster, everybody who is in the dining area or in the food court. And non-probability, as the name is included, that we don't know what's the chance of each person gonna be selected, and it's according to the convenience. So whatever people around us, we will ask them, and we're not looking at what's the chance of some. So people who comes in around us, we will ask them, and this is non-probabilities. That's one of the examples. And it's usually judgmental, and you go, as I said, you said that I'm gonna ask based on your judgment. You said the people who can answer me is only the white community, the white ethnic background communities. So that's the judgmental sampling. And you quota there, and the snowball is same people keeps coming to you, and you same people you're asking them, and they are referring other people who they look like them, and that's what the snowball effect on it. So simple random sampling is every sampling unit has knowing an adequate chance for being selected, as we said. And systematic random sampling is once we group each one of them and we select from stratified a certain way of selecting every fifth person from the white people, every fifth person from the black people, every fifth person from that's what we call systematic random sampling. So it's a clustering, or you look at forums from your customers, every fifth person you're going to select to answer your questions. Now, stratified, we said it, is just a random sampling, is separate the target population into groups. And it could be ethnically, or could be size of units, or type of units. And then you check, get back to these answer, try to check these selected units. And so proportionally and disproportionately. And proportionally saying each stratum is dependent on the size relative to the population. So you say, I'm going to do a 5% here, but disproportionately of the stratum is dependent on its relative size to the population. So we say, well, half of the people here, they are white ethnic background. So if I'm going to do a 1,000 survey, I will ask 500 of them. And the rest, I will ask the other ethnic background. But in proportionally, it says, okay, disproportionately, you say, okay, no, I'm going to ask 10 white people, 10 black people, 10 Indian people, 10 Arabs. That's disproportional to this, the size of it, dependent on the size of it. And there is a multi-sourcing. Sampling is used when the single source cannot generate a large or low incidence sample. So if you're just doing an interviews and it's not generating enough, you can do a telephone, a mail, and email to other people. And we said the clustering is just a group together, clustered. You break part of it and you start selecting a samples out of these group. And in the non-probability, we discussed the fact that we said that convenience and judgment, and the convenience is whatever the group around you or happens to be there. You ask them a question, somebody's passing beside you in the mall, you just ask them. That's a convenient way. Inconvenient way, or you just go to certain places and then you start asking the question. The judgment is when a researcher has kind of a judgmental thinking when they're looking at somebody. They think this person is a middle class, so let me ask him, would he buy a Mercedes if there is a 50%, 10% discount on the car, for example. So non-probabilities. Non-probability sampling method is we do a quota sampling regarding the demographic attitude and behavior of other criteria. And we said the snowball sampling is set of chosen response, and they start referable. They bring in people similar to them to this samples. And we said every time you do sampling, there is a research objectives. You need to answer them. What's your research? What's the question is? The degree of accuracies, how accurate you want to be this answers, and it's being controlled by the resources, whether you have enough money, time, enough budget, time, or enough people to deliver these things. And the time frame is also controlling it, how long it takes to do that, and how difficult is to select this population. So if you are in a mall, it's very difficult to see whether you're selecting the billionaires or the millionaires because they look similar to you. And the scope of research is going, whether you are doing it locally, internationally, that makes a big difference in selecting the chance. Now, factors that determine the sample size with the probability digit, the population variance. So how spreaded these populations within their choices, or if you were looking for a how tall is the person, how in this area sometimes you go, for example, if you asking questions of basketball players, and you will see that they are very much focused. You're looking for people who is more than 2 meters higher. You go in this basketball arena and then you ask, they are very focused. But if you're talking about in a mall, there is not many people taller than 2 meters, and everybody starts spreading in their height. So that's the variance happening there. The level of the confidence desired in the estimated, whether you want it to be a 5% error or 10% errors, degree of the precision, how effective is the precision, the exact people that it's meeting, you're searching for them to answer your question. And for non-probability, we said there is a non-probability. There is no chance of, this person is going to have a chance 1% to be selected out of these 100%. We don't care how much the chance of this, and we select according to, determining the size of is a subjective and according to our judgment. Other samples size determination method is less formal. And is based on sample size of similar previous studies that you have done. So last time you did 1,000, new studies shows up, you need to do another 1,000 maybe. That's less formals. And the last, how to develop a sampling plan is first we need to do a framework to ensure that the data is collected is targeting the people that we are asking people. These are my target, that I'm targeting people. And accordingly to that, we built the sample plan. So if we're targeting the Indians, we need to make sure according to that, then we ask develop the sampling plan, how with the sampling plan is going to be a survey to write, an email to send, or a call to make, in what languages should be written, target population, select the data collection method, how we're going to collect, and identify the sampling frame needed in it, and select the appropriate sampling method. And we said how many people you're going to select out of that. And the last things that we're going to say is steps also to develop it is determine the necessary size and overall contact rate, create an operating plan for selecting sampling using. So then you build your plan accordingly and then execute the plan or that. And the sample that we brought, the simple example that we brought is that when you're trying to build a new survey, according to whether you need to build a new menu, you make sure you're asking the right question to derive whether you should do a new menu or not. And when you want to do a new menu, the next question will be asked, what's going to be inside this new menu? So these are the things that you're looking for, is how can I to be determined all necessary items, including the survey, without the risk of ignoring the old menu and bringing the new menu on. And how should a potential respond selected? How I'm going to select them, whether I'm going to take them, should the customer be interviewed in the dining or before they leave, or ask them for a phone and number to send them the emails. Okay. I think I wish you good luck next class for the test. I am around. Let me know if you have any question. Feel free to leave.